The massive black dragon landed on the burning battlefield with a sound like thunder. His golden eyes looked across the destroyed land where smoke rose from broken buildings and crashed ships. Emperor Taman had won another battle, but this victory felt different. It had come too easily. The enemy forces had given up much faster than anyone expected. His military advisors had told him this war would last for months. They said the rebels were strong and would fight hard. But after only 3 days of fighting, the enemy leaders sent a message saying they surrendered. Taman stretched his huge wings and looked around the battlefield one more time. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. The rebels had been planning this fight for years. They had built strong defenses and gathered many soldiers. Why would they give up so quickly? General Hosung, his most trusted military commander, flew up to him in a smaller ship. The general was also a dragon, but much smaller than the emperor. His scales were dark green instead of black. "My lord," General Hosung said through the communication system, "the enemy has signed the surrender papers. All rebel forces have agreed to stop fighting." "Should we begin the occupation procedures?" Taman thought about this for a moment. Usually he would stay on the battlefield for several days after a victory. He would make sure all enemy weapons were destroyed. He would set up new government systems. He would meet with local leaders to explain the new rules. But today something was pulling him back home. He kept thinking about his palace on Drakmore Prime. More specifically, he kept thinking about his human maid, Yuna. For the past few weeks, Yuna had been acting strangely. She was still polite and did her work well, but something was different. She seemed to be working longer hours than usual. Sometimes he would see her talking quietly with other servants, but they would stop talking when he came near. There had also been more supply deliveries to the palace recently. When he asked about them, Yuna would explain that they were normal household supplies, food, cleaning materials, and maintenance parts for the palace systems, but the amount seemed larger than usual. "General," Taman said finally, "I am returning to Drakmore Prime immediately. You can handle the remaining duties here." General Hosung looked surprised. The Emperor never left a battlefield this quickly. "My lord, are you sure?" "There are still many details to manage. The local population needs reassurance. The new administrative systems need to be established." "You are capable of handling these matters," Taman replied. "I have other concerns that require my attention." The truth was, Taman could not stop worrying about what was happening at his palace. Yuna had been his maid for 3 years now. He had rescued her from slave traders who had captured her from a human colony ship. At first, she had been scared of him, like most people were. Dragons were known throughout the galaxy for their power and their temper. But Yuna had learned quickly that Taman was not like the stories people told about dragon emperors. He did not hurt innocent people. He did not destroy things for fun. He was strict and demanded respect, but he was also fair. Over time, Yuna had become the best servant he had ever had. She learned his daily routine perfectly. She kept his living spaces exactly the way he liked them. She was quiet when he wanted silence and helpful when he needed assistance. Most importantly, she never asked questions about his business or tried to involve herself in his political affairs. That was why her recent behavior was so puzzling. Yuna had always been careful to stay out of his way when he had important meetings. She never listened to conversations that were not her concern. She focused on her duties and nothing else. But lately he had noticed her paying attention to news reports about events in distant parts of the galaxy. She had been learning new languages, which seemed strange for someone whose job was to clean and organize his personal rooms. And sometimes late at night he could hear her talking to someone through a communication device. Taman transformed from his massive dragon form into his humanoid shape for the journey home. In this form he looked like a tall, pale man with golden eyes and long black hair. This shape was better for traveling in spaceships. His personal ship was fast and comfortable. The trip from the battlefield to Drakmore Prime usually took 6 hours through hyperspace. During the journey, Taman tried to focus on reports from other parts of his empire, but his mind kept returning to thoughts of Yuna. What could she possibly be doing that required such secrecy? She was just a human maid. She had no political connections, no military training, and no special skills beyond keeping house. The idea that she might be involved in some kind of conspiracy seemed impossible, but dragons had good instincts, and Taman's instincts were telling him that something significant was happening in his own home while he was away fighting wars. When his ship finally emerged from hyperspace near Drakmore Prime, The first thing Taman noticed was that there were many more ships near his palace than usual. His private landing area, which was normally empty except for his own vessels, was full of ships from many different worlds. He recognized some of the ship designs. There were vessels from the Centauri Republic, the Andromedan Consortium, and several independent trader groups. Some of the ships looked like they came from species he had never dealt with before. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked his ship's captain, a loyal dragon named Sunwoo. Captain Sunwoo was already scanning the ships with the sensors. "My lord, I am detecting vessels from at least 15 different species. They all appear to be civilian ships, not military. Many of them are showing signs of long-distance travel. Are they armed?" "No, my lord. These are transport ships, medical vessels, and supply carriers. They do not appear to pose any threat." Taman stared at the collection of ships surrounding his palace. In all his years as emperor, he had never seen anything like this. His palace was his private home. Only his personal staff and occasionally important diplomats were allowed to visit. He certainly had never given permission for this many foreign vessels to land on his property. The only person who had the authority to authorize visitors in his absence was Yuna. She managed the household staff and handled basic administrative duties for his personal residence. But why would she allow so many strangers to visit? And why were they all here at the same time? As his ship approached the landing platform, Taman could see people moving around outside the palace entrance. Many of them were clearly not from his usual staff. He could see beings from several different species, all appearing to be busy with some kind of organized activity. "Captain Sunwoo," he said, "land the ship quietly. I want to observe what is happening before anyone knows I have returned." Something very unusual was happening in his home, and Emperor Taman was determined to find out exactly what his human maid had been doing while he was away at war. Emperor Taman moved quietly through the corridors of his own palace. He had never needed to sneak around his home before, but today felt different. The sounds coming from his private living areas were unlike anything he had ever heard there before. There was laughter. Real, genuine laughter echoing through halls that were usually silent except for the soft footsteps of servants. There was music playing, but not the formal classical pieces he preferred. This music was cheerful and came from many different worlds. Most surprising of all, there were voices speaking in dozens of languages he recognized and some he did not. His palace had become some kind of meeting place for beings from across the galaxy. Taman pressed himself against the wall near the entrance to his main living chamber. Through the slightly open door, he could see inside. What he saw made him question whether he was in the right place. His furniture had been moved around completely. The cold, formal arrangement he preferred had been changed into something warm and welcoming. Comfortable seating areas were set up in small circles where different groups of people could talk together. The lighting had been adjusted to be softer and more friendly. In the center of all this activity was Yuna. But this was not the quiet, careful maid he knew. This Yuna moved with confidence and authority. She was clearly in charge of whatever was happening here. As Taman watched, a tall, blue-skinned being approached Yuna with a datapad. The being was from Andromeda, a species known for being very formal and difficult to work with. But this Andromedian was speaking to Yuna like she was an old friend. "The medical supplies for the Kepler colony are ready for transport," the Andromedian said in perfect standard galactic language. "The transport ship can leave within the hour if you approve the route." Yuna took the datapad and studied it carefully. "Change the route through the Vega system instead of going direct. It will take longer, but it will avoid the military patrols in that sector. We cannot risk having the supplies confiscated." "Understood," the Andromedian replied. "What about the communication equipment for the Outer Rim settlements?" "That shipment will go out tomorrow with the refugee transport. Kyung-Soo has already arranged the proper documentation to make it look like standard colony supplies." Taman felt his world turning upside down. His maid was organizing some kind of massive operation right in his own home. She was coordinating supply shipments to places he had never heard her mention before. She was talking about avoiding military patrols and creating false documentation. Even more shocking, she was speaking Andromedian fluently. He had never heard her speak anything except standard galactic and her native human language. When had she learned to communicate with so many different species? A small, furry creature from the outer galaxy regions came up to Yuna, carrying something that looked broken. The creature was making distressed chirping sounds that Taman recognized as the language of the Kesh people. These beings rarely left their homeworlds and almost never interacted with other species. But Yuna knelt down to the creature's level and began speaking in what sounded like perfect Keshian. She took the broken device from the creature's tiny hands and examined it closely. The device appeared to be some kind of translator, probably damaged during the long journey to reach his palace. Yuna pulled out a small toolkit and began working on the device with practiced skill. Her fingers moved quickly and confidently as she repaired the complex alien technology. Within minutes, the device was working again. The Kesh creature's chirping was now being translated into standard galactic. "Thank you, kind human. My people will be able to communicate with the settlement coordinators now." "You are very welcome, Hyungwoo," Yuna replied, using what must have been the creature's name. "Make sure your people understand that the transport to New Terra will leave in 2 days. There will be other families traveling with you, so the children will have friends to play with during the journey." The small creature made happy chirping sounds and handed Yuna something small and carved. She accepted the gift with a smile that completely transformed her face. Taman realized that in 3 years of her service he had never seen her look truly happy before. But here, surrounded by all these strangers, Yuna looked like a completely different person. She looked alive in a way that made Taman suddenly understand that she had been merely existing when she was serving him alone. Another person approached Yuna, and Taman was surprised to recognize him. It was Jinwoo, a young human man Taman had rescued from pirates about 2 years ago. The Emperor had given Jinwoo transportation to a safe colony world and had not thought about him since. But apparently Jinwoo had not forgotten. He was here in the palace, and he was clearly part of whatever operation Yuna was running. "The supply calculations for the Tauseti refugees are complete," Jinwoo said, showing Yuna a complex holographic display. "We can transport 12,000 people to compatible worlds where they can maintain their cultural communities. The agricultural worlds in the Sigma sector have agreed to accept families with farming experience." "What about the others?" Yuna asked, studying the data. "Not everyone will want to become farmers. Minseo has found placement opportunities in several industrial systems for people with technical skills, and Dohyun is coordinating with educational institutions that can help the children continue their studies." Taman felt his head spinning. These were all people he had helped at some point over the years. Humans he had rescued or assisted and then forgotten about, but they had not forgotten him, and somehow they had all found their way back to his palace to work with Yuna. What exactly was she doing with these people, and how long had this been going on without his knowledge? As he continued watching, more pieces of the puzzle began to come together. This was not just a random gathering. This was a coordinated relief operation on a massive scale. Yuna was running some kind of humanitarian network that reached across multiple star systems. Medical supplies, refugee transport, communication equipment, agricultural assistance, educational support. The scope of what she was managing was enormous. This was the kind of operation that required significant resources, advanced planning, and detailed knowledge of political situations across the galaxy. How was it possible that his quiet maid had organized something this complex? And how had she done it using his palace as a base of operations without him noticing? Taman realized he needed to see more before he made any decisions about how to respond to this discovery. His first instinct was to be angry about the unauthorized use of his home and resources. But watching Yuna work, seeing the gratitude and respect these people had for her, he found himself feeling something else entirely. He was feeling impressed. Emperor Taman could not stay hidden any longer. His curiosity had grown too strong and he needed answers. He stepped out from behind the wall and walked into his main living chamber. The moment he appeared, every conversation stopped. The silence was so complete that Taman could hear his own heartbeat. Dozens of beings from across the galaxy stared at him with expressions of surprise and fear. Many of them had probably never seen a dragon emperor before. Others had heard stories about his power and his temper. But the person he was watching most carefully was Yuna. She turned slowly to face him, and he could see her mind working quickly. She was not panicking, which impressed him. Instead, she seemed to be calculating her options and preparing to explain herself. "Your Imperial Majesty," she said with a respectful bow, "you have returned earlier than we expected." The calmness in her voice was remarkable. Here she was, caught red-handed using his palace for unauthorized activities, and she was speaking to him as if this was a normal situation that could be handled with proper etiquette. "Indeed I have," Taman replied. Looking around the room at all the faces watching him nervously, I find my private chambers filled with uninvited guests and my maid running what appears to be some kind of interstellar operation. Around them, aliens from many different worlds were quietly gathering their belongings and preparing to leave as quickly as possible. The last thing anyone wanted was to be caught in the middle of a confrontation between a powerful dragon and someone who had clearly violated his trust. But before anyone could move toward the exits, Yuna did something that surprised everyone in the room. She held up one small hand and remarkably all the aliens stopped moving. They waited to see what she would say. This tiny human woman, who had never been anything more than a servant in Taman's presence, was able to command immediate attention and obedience from beings much larger and more powerful than herself. The Dragon Emperor found this both puzzling and impressive. "If I may request a few moments to explain before our guests leave, Your Majesty?" Yuna asked. Her voice was still respectful, but it was different now. She was not speaking like a servant anymore. She was speaking like someone who had authority and expected to be heard. Taman gestured for her to continue. His anger was being replaced by fascination. He wanted to understand what she had built here and how she had managed to create it without his knowledge. Yuna walked to the center of the room and touched something that looked like a decorative crystal. Suddenly, the air above them filled with a holographic display that showed star maps, shipping routes, and data streams covering multiple sectors of the galaxy. The display was incredibly detailed and obviously represented a massive amount of information. Supply lines, communication networks, transportation schedules, and refugee movements were all shown in different colors and symbols. This was not the work of an amateur. This was a professional-level operation that rivaled anything his own military intelligence services produced. "For the past 18 months, Yuna began, I have been coordinating humanitarian relief efforts for populations displaced by various conflicts across the Outer Rim territories. Your palace's location and your reputation for staying out of political disputes made it an ideal neutral meeting ground for species who could not safely interact. Elsewhere, the holographic display zoomed in on specific regions where Taman recognized the aftermath of recent territorial wars. Red indicators showed refugee camps and disaster areas, while green lines traced supply routes that avoided military blockades and hostile territories. The medical supplies for the plague outbreak on Kepler Colony, communication equipment for the isolated settlements in the Vega system, transportation coordination for the climate refugees from the Tau Ceti disaster. Yuna continued, pointing to different areas of the display. We have been facilitating aid that could not move through official channels due to political complications. Taman studied the information more carefully. The scope of what she was showing him was staggering. This was not just helping a few individuals here and there. This was a comprehensive relief network that was actively preventing humanitarian disasters across multiple star systems. The plague on Kepler Colony, he said. How many people were affected? Approximately 47,000 colonists were at risk of death, Yuna replied without hesitation. The standard medical protocols could not handle the mutated bacterial strain. The Imperial Medical Corps could not intervene officially because Kepler Colony is located in disputed territory between 3 different factions. Sending aid through official channels would have been interpreted as taking sides in the political conflict. So you sent aid through unofficial channels instead? Yes, Your Majesty. We used cultural exchange documentation to justify the shipments. The medical supplies were disguised as research materials for academic institutions. The transport ships carried official permits for educational cooperation between different worlds. Taman was beginning to understand the complexity of what Yuna had accomplished. She had not just organized charity work. She had created a sophisticated system for bypassing political barriers that prevented aid from reaching people who needed it. And the Tau Ceti refugees? He asked. Solar flare activity made their agricultural regions uninhabitable for several growing seasons, Yuna explained, adjusting the holographic display to show that star system. We coordinated resettlement efforts for approximately 12,000 individuals. They were transported to compatible worlds where they could maintain their cultural communities and continue their traditional ways of life. As she spoke, More details appeared on the display. Transportation schedules, settlement locations, resource requirements, and integration programs were all mapped out with careful precision. This was long-term planning that took into account not just immediate needs but also the future welfare of the people being helped. The families with farming experience were settled on agricultural worlds in the Sigma sector, Una continued. Those with technical skills were placed in industrial systems where their expertise was needed. The children were enrolled in educational programs designed to help them adapt to their new homes while maintaining connections to their cultural heritage. Taemin felt his understanding of his maid changing completely. For 3 years, he had thought she was just a quiet human who cleaned his rooms and served his meals. But she was actually a brilliant organizer who understood interstellar politics, cross-cultural communication, and large-scale logistics better than most of his official advisors. "How long has this been operating without my knowledge?" he asked. 18 months at full scale, Una admitted, but it started much smaller. At first I was just helping individual refugees find safe passage to better situations. Word spread gradually and more people began coming to us for assistance. The Emperor looked around the room at all the beings who were still waiting quietly to see how this conversation would end. They were watching Una with obvious respect and gratitude. These people did not see her as just a maid who had gotten above herself. They saw her as someone who had saved their lives or the lives of people they cared about. Before Emperor Taemin could ask more questions, several of the alien visitors stepped forward. They looked nervous about speaking to a dragon emperor, but they seemed determined to say something important. A tall woman with blue-tinted skin and silver markings on her face approached first. Taemin recognized her as a Zephyrian, a species known for being careful traders who rarely got involved in other people's problems. "Your Imperial Majesty," the Zephyrian said, her voice shaking slightly. "If I may speak, the human Una has saved thousands of lives. My people's colony ship was stranded in deep space for months. Our engines had failed, and no one would help us because our sector was considered too dangerous for commercial rescue operations." She paused and looked at Una with obvious gratitude before continuing. Una arranged for engine parts that no government or corporation would provide. She found transport ships willing to enter our sector. She even helped us negotiate safe passage through 3 different territorial zones to reach a suitable world for resettlement. Other aliens began to speak up as well. Their voices created a chorus of stories that filled the crystal chamber with testimonials about Una's work. A representative from the Centauri Republic, a lizard-like being with green scales and large golden eyes, described how Una had coordinated medical teams to treat a rare disease that was killing their population. The medical knowledge required came from 4 different species, the Centaurian explained. No single world had the complete solution, but Una brought together experts from across the galaxy to develop a treatment that saved our colony. An elderly human man from a frontier world stepped forward next. His clothes showed signs of hard work and simple living. "My world lost all our crops to a fungal infection," he said in a quiet voice. "We were facing starvation. The agricultural corporation said it would take 2 years to develop resistant seeds, but Una found scientists who had already solved similar problems on other worlds. She arranged for emergency food supplies and new seed varieties that saved our entire population." As Taemin listened to story after story, he began to understand something important. This was not just about the scale of Una's operation. It was about the personal care and attention she gave to each situation. A young mother holding a small child spoke next. "My daughter was born with a medical condition that could only be treated on one specific world," she said. "But that world was in the middle of a war zone. No transport company would take civilians there. Una arranged for a medical evacuation that got my daughter the treatment she needed. Then she found us a new home on a safe world with good schools and opportunities." The stories continued for several minutes. Each one revealed a different aspect of what Una had been doing. She had not just been moving supplies and people around. She had been solving complex problems that required understanding different cultures, navigating political situations, and finding creative solutions to seemingly impossible challenges. What impressed Taemin most was not the efficiency of the operation, but the obvious love and respect these beings had for his maid. They spoke about her not as a distant administrator who had processed their cases, but as someone who had personally cared about their problems and worked hard to help them. "How?" Taemin asked finally, his voice cutting through the testimonials. How did you accomplish all of this without my knowledge, using my resources, operating from my own palace? Yuna met his golden eyes directly. You have always been fair in allowing me to manage household accounts for supplies and maintenance. Over time, I realized that small amounts could be redirected to help people in emergency situations. I was careful never to take anything you would actually miss. She gestured toward the holographic display, which now showed detailed financial records. Your reputation for staying out of galactic politics meant that ships could meet here without triggering diplomatic incidents. Governments that were hostile to each other could work together through neutral ground. But the scale of this operation, Taman said, studying the financial data, this goes far beyond household supplies. It started very small, Yuna explained. I helped a few refugees find passage to safer systems. I used leftover food supplies to feed families who had lost everything. I arranged for unused space in your supply shipments to carry medical materials to worlds that needed them. She pointed to different areas of the financial display as she continued. But as word spread, more people began coming to us for help. Other humans you had rescued over the years wanted to contribute their skills and knowledge. The operation grew naturally as more needs were identified and more resources became available. Taman looked around the room at the humans who had been quietly helping Yuna throughout the conversation. He recognized several faces now. These were people he had helped at various times over the years, usually without thinking much about it afterward. Jinwoo, he said, addressing the young man directly. You were captured by pirates 3 years ago. I provided transportation to get you to safety. Yes, Your Majesty, Jinwoo replied respectfully. After I reached the safe colony, I discovered I had strong technical skills. I learned about computer systems and data management. When Yuna contacted me about helping with refugee coordination, I wanted to contribute something meaningful. And you, Minseo, Taman continued, looking at a young woman with intelligent eyes. You were a political refugee whose family I helped escape persecution. Your Majesty saved my entire family, Minseo said gratefully. I speak 17 languages and understand the cultures of many different worlds. Yuna needed someone who could communicate with aliens from various species and help them understand each other. Taman began to see a pattern. Each of the humans helping Yuna had specific skills that were valuable for humanitarian work. But more importantly, they were all people who had been helped by him at some point and wanted to give something back. You recruited them, he realized, looking at Yuna with new understanding. I contacted them, she agreed. People you had helped who wanted to use their abilities to help others. We all felt grateful for what you had done for us, and we wanted to honor that by doing good work in your name. The Dragon Emperor felt something he rarely experienced. These people had taken his casual acts of mercy and turned them into something much larger. They had created a network of kindness that was spreading across the galaxy, and they were doing it because they wanted to reflect well on him. You have been doing this work to honor me? He asked. We have been doing this work because you showed us that power should be used to help people, Yuna replied. Every person in this room is alive and free because you chose to help them when you could have ignored their problems. We wanted to follow your example. Taman looked around the room once more, seeing everything with completely new eyes. His random acts of kindness had inspired these people to create something beautiful and important. They were not just running a humanitarian network. They were trying to live up to the example he had accidentally set for them. Emperor Taman walked slowly around the room, looking more carefully at everything Yuna had created. Now that he knew what he was seeing, he could understand how cleverly she had transformed his cold, formal chambers into something warm and functional. The furniture had been arranged to make beings from different worlds feel comfortable. Some areas had low seating for species that were naturally short. Other areas had tall perches for flying creatures. The temperature controls had been adjusted to create different climate zones within the same room. Most remarkably, his collection of rare artifacts and precious items remained exactly where they had always been. Even while turning his private space into a command center for interstellar humanitarian work, Yuna had been careful not to disturb anything that belonged to him personally. He paused in front of a communication station that had been built into what looked like a decorative wall panel. The technology was sophisticated and expensive, but it was completely hidden from casual view. Someone could spend hours in this, room without realizing they were looking at one of the most advanced communication networks in the galaxy. "This equipment," he said, examining the hidden systems more closely. "This is military-grade technology. How did you acquire it?" "Dohyun has connections with electronics suppliers," Yuna explained, indicating a quiet young man who had been working at a computer terminal. "He was a political prisoner whose family you protected from government persecution. After reaching safety, he became an expert in communication systems." Dohyun stepped forward respectfully. "Your Majesty, much of this equipment was purchased legally through commercial channels. Some pieces were donated by grateful families who had been helped by our network. A few items were salvaged from ships that would have been destroyed otherwise." Taemin studied the young man carefully. "You built this entire communication system?" "With help from others, yes, Your Majesty. We needed the ability to coordinate activities across many star systems while maintaining security. The network can handle encrypted communications in over 30 languages and can route messages through neutral territories to avoid political complications. This was not amateur work. This was professional-level technology that had been installed and maintained by people who clearly understood what they were doing." Taemin was beginning to realize that his casual rescues over the years had accidentally gathered together some very talented individuals. He moved to another area where several young beings from different species were working quietly with learning tablets and educational materials. They looked up at him with curiosity rather than fear, which was unusual. Most people were frightened when they first met a dragon emperor. "And these children?" he asked. "War orphans," Yuna said, joining him near the small study area. "We have been arranging adoptive families or community placements for them, but the process takes time. Meanwhile, they need education and care. I thought since the palace has so much empty space, they could stay here safely while we find permanent homes for them." One of the children, a small humanoid with shimmering silver skin, looked up at Taemin with wide, interested eyes. After studying him for a moment, the child offered him a piece of artwork that had been drawn on a tablet. The drawing showed the palace with many different creatures living together happily. There were dragons and humans and aliens of all kinds, all drawn in bright colors with cheerful expressions. In the child's imagination, his fortress of solitude had become a welcoming home for everyone who needed help. Taemin accepted the artwork carefully, holding it gently in his large hands. "What is your name, young one?" "I am Sujin," the child replied in perfect standard galactic, though it was clearly not her native language. "Yuna has been teaching me to speak like humans so I can talk to my new family when we find them." "And where will your new family be?" "On a farming world where there are others like me," Sujin said happily. "Yuna says they have purple flowers there and 3 moons that make pretty patterns in the sky." The child's simple trust and happiness made Taemin feel something he rarely experienced. This small being had lost her original family to war, but she still believed that good things would happen to her because Yuna had promised to take care of her. Kyung-soo, the young man he had seen earlier helping with logistics, approached with a data pad. "Your Majesty, if I may show you something." Taemin nodded and Kyung-soo activated a financial display that showed detailed cost analysis charts and resource management reports. "We have been very careful to ensure that the humanitarian operations actually save money in the long term," Kyung-soo explained. "By preventing small problems from becoming major conflicts, we reduce the need for expensive military interventions later." The data was impressive. The early intervention approach was not just morally beneficial, it was economically efficient. Providing medical supplies to stop a plague was much cheaper than dealing with the refugee crisis that would result if the plague spread. Helping displaced families find new homes prevented them from becoming long-term refugees who would need ongoing support. "We have also been generating intelligence reports," added Sora, a young woman with obvious analytical skills. "The refugee movements and aid requests create a real-time picture of developing problems across multiple sectors. We can identify potential conflicts before they become serious." She activated another display showing threat assessments and early warning indicators. "We have identified 3 situations that could develop into major wars if they are not addressed quickly. Small interventions now could prevent massive suffering later. Taman studied the analysis carefully. This was the kind of strategic intelligence his official diplomatic services struggled to produce. But these young people had created it naturally, as a result of their humanitarian work. "You have built something remarkable here," he said finally. "This is not just charity work. This is a comprehensive intelligence and aid network that could change how the galaxy responds to crises." Yuna smiled. And again, Taman was struck by how different she looked when she was truly happy. "We have tried to create something worthy of the example you set for us, Your Majesty. You showed us that power should be used to protect people who cannot protect themselves." As the primary sun began to set outside the palace windows, casting the room in the soft twilight that Taman preferred, he realized that he was looking at something far more valuable than territory or treasure. He was seeing what his empire could become if it was guided by compassion rather than conquest. The last of the visiting ships departed as darkness fell over Drakmor Prime. The alien visitors had quietly gathered their belongings and prepared to return to their home worlds. But not before expressing their gratitude to both Yuna and Emperor Taman. Many of them had seemed surprised that the Dragon Emperor had not been angry about discovering the unauthorized use of his palace. Instead, he had listened carefully to their stories and asked thoughtful questions about their needs and situations. Now the palace was quiet again, but it felt different than it had before. The humans who had been helping Yuna were efficiently restoring the room to its original appearance, but Taman raised his hand to stop them. "Leave everything as it is," he said quietly. "I want to understand what you have built here." The communication systems, the comfortable seating arrangements, and the educational area for the children remained in place. For the first time in years, Taman's private chambers felt alive with purpose instead of empty with solitude. Yuna approached him carefully. Despite everything that had happened, she still seemed uncertain about his reaction to her secret activities. "Are you angry with me, Your Majesty?" she asked in a quiet voice. Taman considered the question seriously. He should be angry. His privacy had been violated, his resources had been used without permission, and his political neutrality had potentially been compromised. But instead of anger, he felt something he had not experienced in a long time. He felt proud. Not of himself, but of someone else. "Tell me about the scope of the operation," he said instead of answering her question directly. Yuna reactivated the holographic display, and this time she showed him the complete network. The full picture was even more impressive than what he had seen before. Supply routes connected hundreds of worlds. Communication networks linked dozens of species. Transportation coordination helped thousands of refugees find new homes every month. The medical assistance program has helped over 200,000 people in the past year, Yuna explained, pointing to different sections of the display. The refugee resettlement network has found safe homes for nearly 50,000 displaced families. The communication project has restored contact between isolated colonies and their home governments. Each statistic represented real lives that had been saved or improved. The numbers were staggering when Taman compared them to the populations of many worlds in his empire. The educational support system has provided schooling for over 10,000 children whose education was interrupted by wars or disasters, she continued. The agricultural assistance program has helped prevent famine on 17 different worlds by providing resistant seed varieties and modern farming techniques. As the display showed more details, Taman began to understand the true sophistication of what had been created. This was not just a relief organization. It was a comprehensive system for preventing and responding to humanitarian crises across multiple galactic sectors. "How many people work for this network?" he asked. "Directly, about 300 people spread across 40 different worlds," Yuna replied. "But thousands of others contribute occasionally by providing transportation, supplies, information, or temporary shelter for refugees." "And they all volunteer their time?" "Most do. Some of the technical specialists receive small payments for their work. But most people participate because they want to help or because they were helped themselves at some point." Taman walked to the large window that looked out over the mountains of Drakmor Prime. In the distance, he could see the lights of the small city that served his palace staff and their families. Those people lived comfortable, peaceful lives under his protection, but he had never thought about extending that protection to people on other worlds. Why did you start this? He asked without turning around. Because I could, Yuna said simply. When I was captured by slave traders, I thought my life was over. But you saved me and gave me a chance to build a new life. I realized that there were millions of people in similar situations who just needed someone to care about what happened to them. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was thoughtful. You have the power to conquer worlds, Your Majesty, but you also have the power to save people. I wanted to use the resources and opportunities you gave me to save as many people as possible. And you believed I would approve of this? I believed that you were the kind of ruler who would understand the difference between political neutrality and moral neutrality, Yuna said carefully. You have never targeted innocent civilians in your military campaigns. You have never destroyed infrastructure that people needed to survive. You have never harmed people who posed no threat to you. She turned to face him directly. I hoped that you would see this work as consistent with the principles you already follow. You have always used your power responsibly. I wanted to follow your example. Taman turned back to the holographic display, studying the network that Yuna had created in his name. Every supply route, every communication link, every refugee transport represented his values being extended across the galaxy. This network operates in my name, he asked. Not officially, Yuna replied quickly. We never claim to represent your government or speak for your empire. But people know that we operate from your palace with your protection. Your reputation for fairness and strength gives us credibility with species who might not trust other organizations. So my name is associated with humanitarian work across multiple sectors. Yes, Your Majesty, people throughout the Outer Rim territories know that help is available through connections to the Dragon Emperor's palace. They see you as someone who cares about innocent people, not just political power. Taman absorbed this information slowly. For years, he had built his reputation through military strength and political independence, but apparently, his small acts of mercy had created a different kind of reputation. People saw him as a protector rather than just a conqueror. What do you need to expand this operation? He asked suddenly. Yuna looked surprised by the question. Your Majesty, if I were to officially support this network, what resources would you need to help more people? The room became very quiet. All the humans who had been working with Yuna stopped what they were doing and looked at the Emperor with expressions of hope and disbelief. More ships for transportation, Yuna said after a moment. Better medical facilities for treating refugees with serious health problems. Expanded communication systems to coordinate with more worlds. Official diplomatic protection for aid workers operating in dangerous areas. And personnel? We could use more people with specialized skills. Medical professionals, engineers, translators, logistics coordinators. But finding trustworthy people is always difficult. Taman nodded thoughtfully. I think I may be able to help with that problem. The next morning arrived with the soft purple light that was common on Drakmor Prime. Emperor Taman stood in his chambers, which still showed the changes Yuna had made for her humanitarian operations. For the first time in years, he had slept peacefully without worrying about military campaigns or political problems. When Yuna entered the chamber carrying his usual morning tea, she found him studying the holographic displays that showed the refugee network. He had spent most of the night learning about the different projects and understanding how they all work together. Your Majesty, she said respectfully, setting down the tea service with the same quiet efficiency she had always shown. Yuna, Taman replied, turning to face her. I have made a decision that will change both our lives. She waited silently, her expression calm but attentive. You are no longer my maid, he announced. I am promoting you to Imperial Humanitarian Coordinator, with full authority to use whatever resources are necessary to expand this network across my entire empire. Yuna's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment she seemed unable to speak. I do not understand. Your Majesty, she said finally. For 3 years, I thought I was employing a servant to clean my rooms and serve my meals, Taman explained. But I have discovered that I was actually providing support to one of the most effective diplomatic and humanitarian coordinators in the galaxy. The question is whether you are willing to work for me officially. He gestured toward the displays showing the aid network. Instead of operating in secret with limited resources, you would have the full backing of the Dragon Empire. Instead of helping thousands of people, you could help millions. Yuna set down the tea with hands that were barely shaking. What would this mean, Your Majesty? It means unlimited access to Imperial resources. Official diplomatic immunity for you and your staff. The authority to coordinate aid efforts on a galactic scale. It means that instead of avoiding my military forces, you could work with them to deliver assistance more effectively. Taman walked to the window and looked out over his domain. It also means that my empire would be known throughout the galaxy, not just for its military power, but for its humanitarian efforts. Instead of ruling through fear, I could lead through the respect that comes from helping others. He turned back to face her. You have shown me what true leadership looks like. Not conquest or control, but protection and service. You have demonstrated that the greatest strength comes from helping others become strong. Yuna looked around the chamber that had been her secret command center, then back at the Dragon Emperor who had unknowingly provided the foundation for everything she had built. I accept, Your Majesty, she said, but I have conditions. Taman smiled, genuinely amused. Even when accepting a position of unprecedented authority, she was still negotiating terms. Name them. The humans who have been helping me must receive official positions as well. Jinwoo, Minseo, Dohyun, Kyungsu, Sora, and the others have proven themselves. This network cannot function without their expertise. Granted, Taman agreed immediately. I want regular reports sent to you about all our activities. No more secrets. You should know exactly how your resources are being used and what results we are achieving. A reasonable requirement. I want the authority to recruit others like us, people you have helped who want to contribute to something larger than themselves. There are hundreds of individuals across the galaxy who owe their freedom or their lives to your interventions. Many of them would be valuable additions to this network. An excellent idea, Taman said. I had not considered the potential of organizing all the people I have assisted over the years. Yuna hesitated before making her final request. There is one more thing, Your Majesty. Yes? I would like to continue making your tea in the mornings. Some traditions are worth maintaining. Taman laughed, a sound that had not been heard in his palace for many years. Agreed, though I suspect you will be too busy saving the galaxy to spend much time on household duties. Over the following days, the transformation of the Dragon Empire began. Ships that had once carried only military supplies now also transported medical equipment and humanitarian aid. Communication networks that had been used for military coordination were expanded to include refugee assistance and disaster response. The humans who had been working secretly with Yuna were given official positions with impressive titles and significant budgets. Jinwoo became Director of Technical Operations. Minseo was appointed Chief of Interspecies Communications. Dohyun took charge of systems integration. Kyungsu became Director of Financial Planning. Sora was made Chief Intelligence Analyst. Word spread quickly through the galaxy that the Dragon Empire was offering assistance to anyone who needed help, regardless of their political affiliations or species. The palace that had once been known as a fortress of isolation became famous as a center of hope and aid. Refugees began arriving not just for temporary assistance, but seeking permanent homes within Taman's territory. Scientists and doctors volunteered their services to help with humanitarian projects. Even former enemies began sending requests for cooperation on disaster relief efforts. The most significant change, however, was in how other rulers viewed Emperor Taman. Leaders who had once feared his military power now sought his partnership in addressing regional problems. The Dragon Emperor, who had been respected for his strength, was now also admired for his compassion. 6 months after discovering Yuna's secret network, Taman stood in the same chamber where it had all begun, but now the room was officially designated as the Imperial Humanitarian Command Center, and it buzzed with activity around the clock. Yuna approached him with the daily reports, but she also carried his morning tea. Despite her new responsibilities and prestigious title, she had kept her promise to maintain this simple tradition. The morning briefing, Your Majesty, she said, offering him the detailed summaries of aid operations, refugee movements, and disaster responses from across the Empire. How many people did we help yesterday? Taman asked, accepting both the tea and the reports. Direct assistance to approximately 8,000 individuals, Yuna replied. Medical aid, transportation, communication support, and emergency supplies. But the indirect effects are much larger. The early warning system prevented a potential conflict that could have displaced millions. Taman sipped his tea and considered how much his life had changed. A year ago, he had measured his success by the territories he controlled and the enemies he had defeated. Now he measured it by the lives that had been saved and improved. Any regrets? He asked Yuna. She smiled that same transformative smile he had first seen when she was working with refugees. Only that we did not start this sooner, Your Majesty. As reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy about successful aid operations and grateful populations, Emperor Taman realized that he had achieved something more valuable than any military conquest. He had found a way to be remembered not as a destroyer, but as a builder of hope. And it had all started with a human maid who believed that power was meant to serve those who needed it most. The Dragon Emperor had learned that true strength came not from inspiring fear, but from inspiring others to help make the galaxy a better place for everyone.